So this week's snippets look at World War I and ultimately the U.S. entry into World War I. Remember, we're on the kind of abbreviated schedule this week due to the college schedule. So with this first snippet, what I want to do is kind of review the origins of the war, and then the early stages of the war. So 3 maps reinforcing what we had in the last snippets to kind of set the stage. So the first is the alliance map of Europe as of 1914, the triple alliance between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Italy was always shaky here because Italy's prime territorial demands were always going to be on the Adriatic coast, parts of modern day Slovenia and Croatia, which of course were under the Austrians' control, and then the counter alliance being Russia, France, and Great Britain, with in addition a Russian alliance with Serbia and Montenegro, which of course becomes critical in terms of the start of the war. And these are French colonies here in Africa. So that's the first, that Europe had basically been divided into this network of two alliances. The second map, this is the ethnic map of Europe as of basically the start of the war. And you don't need to be an ethnographer to see that there's a difference here between Western Europe on the one hand, which tends to have ethnically homogeneous countries, and Eastern Europe on the other, where you have all kinds of different ethnic groups that are being ruled by other ethnic groups, especially here in Austria-Hungary. So in this surge of nationalism in the early 20th century, the idea that individual ethnic groups should be able to be self-governing. So you should have, like a country of Serbs and a country of Romanians. This part of Europe was particularly problematic because, let's take an easy one here. Let's look at a map of Romanians. How do you draw a Romania in which the only people in the country are Romanians? You also have ethnic Hungarians, you have Jews, you have a small number of Germans who live in Romania, or here in Bosnia, which is essentially the start of the World War I. We have Bosnians, Serbs, and Croats that also live there. So this emergence of nationalism destabilizes Eastern Europe and makes it more likely that there will be a war. And when there is a war, more likely that the war will be very problematic. And then the third, this is a map we looked at last time. So this is the Schlieffen Plan, where the assumption was a quick attack through Belgium, which is neutral, curving the French coast. This was critical to the Schlieffen Plan. The idea was to move German troops to the sea and then be able to sweep into Paris from the south. Keep this in the back of your mind, how the Schlieffen Plan was supposed to work. So you'll have a massive German attack through Belgium, but the attack will make it up to the English Channel and reemerge from southern Paris. So you just won't have attacks through Belgium on northern Paris. So these are the 3 kind of maps. We have the Triple Alliance with dividing Europe into 2 sides. We have this ethnic sort of breakdown of Eastern Europe, and even a country like Greece, which is fairly ethnically homogeneous, has some non-Greeks who live in the country, and then the Schlieffen Plan. So all of this tinderbox gets set off in the summer of 1914 when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who is the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, decides to visit Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, this province, remember, that used to be part of Turkey that the Austrians had annexed less than a decade before. And Serb terrorists, the Serbian government. Let's go back to the map here. So here's Serbia, here's Austria-Hungary. The Serbian government in 1903, there had been a coup. One monarch is replaced by, he's not replaced, he's killed, and then the new monarch is much more nationalistic. And there is this advocacy of what's called a Greater Serbia within the Serb military and intelligence. The idea that all Serbs should be under Serbian control, even if that means some other people are also going to be under Serbian control. And so Serbian terrorists target the Archduke, and they assassinate him and his wife. You get a sense of how the Archduke was traveling. He was warned about this possibility. He doesn't really take obvious security precautions. And one of the reminders of how unusual decisions can affect world history. The initial terrorist attack fails. They roll a bomb under the Archduke's car. It does badly injure a member of his security detail. And rather than going back to a secure location, the Archduke insists on traveling to the Sarajevo hospital so he can see what happened to his to one of his security personnel. His driver gets lost in Sarajevo and literally stumble. They drive down an alley which is blocked off, and one of the assassins happened to be walking down the alley and shoots the Archduke. So the Archduke had any sense, this assassination would not have occurred. This is, of course, international news, and this is critical. War does not occur for another month or so, and there were lots of opportunities to avoid the war even then. Austria insists not merely on sort of working with with all of the major powers. No major power has an interest in terrorists. It's likely that Austria could have gotten international condemnation of the Serbs. Instead, basically demands that the Serbs allow an Austrian investigation of this in Serbia itself, and basically would have made Serbia kind of a vassal state of Austria. Serbia says no. Austria then attacks Serbia. Russia, who was a Serbian ally, announces that it's going to attack Austria. When Russia attacks Austria, Germany announces that it's going to declare war on Russia. Secretly, the German government, the Kaiser, had promised Austria that if war occurred as a result of Serbia, and if Russia attacked Austria, that Germany would come to Austria's defense. This is a document sometimes called the blank check, because basically Germany is sort of ceding its strategic decisions to the Austrians, who were not making decisions in a particularly rational fashion in July of 1914. And then when Germany declares war on Russia, that triggers the Schlieffen Plan. So Germany implements the Schlieffen Plan and invades France. Watching all of this is the British Foreign Minister, Edward Grey, and this is a quite famous quote. It's not entirely clear that this quote actually occurred. You can see that Grey is writing his memoirs. This is a 7 years after the end of World War I, but he is suggesting in this quote that as all of these countries were declaring war, that he remarked, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetimes." If he actually said that, he was prescient. The problem with this is with World War I, and there is no other, I think, modern conflict like this, that every major power, the British, the French, the Germans, the Austrians, the Turks, the Russians, the Italians, all believe that they were declining relative to their foes. That is, that they concluded it would be better for them to go to war in 1914 than in 1925, because in 1925 they would be weaker than they were a decade before. You can't have a situation where every power is declining. And in fact, Britain, Germany, and Russia probably would have been stronger a decade down the road. But there is this rush into the conflict. This is German troops mobilizing to the front. They're going from Munich to Paris. They say they're going to be home by Christmas. Everyone seems to assume that the war is going to end in Christmas. It doesn't, as we all know, work out that way. This is the map of the German invasion. One thing that you'll notice here, remember the Schlieffen Plan as designed. Germany had to race to the sea and attack Paris from both the north and the south. The new head of the German military right before World War I, General von Moltke, changes the Schlieffen Plan, takes back some of the troops in the Belgian invasion and assigns them to the east. And the result is a more limited invasion, which does occupy 90% of Belgium. But because it doesn't trap the French forces on both sides in kind of a pincer movement. The result is that the French are able to reestablish a defensive line. Around 10% of French territory is occupied by Germany, but the French capital of Paris and the major French military forces will not be captured. Keep this in mind for a few weeks down the road when we look at World War II, when the outcome here is very, very different. And the result is a so-called race to the sea, where the two sides set up defensive positions, which come to be known as trenches, and this is a photograph of a World War I trench, which is just it's a horrific situation. But the trenches prove to be very, very resilient. Tanks haven't really been invented at this point, so tanks kind of overrun fences. This is a defensive war. So the Schlieffen Plan, because it is not implemented correctly, fails, and Germany is faced with a two-front war. That said, on the Eastern Front, the Russians, who were very poorly led, suffered disastrous defeats. So Germany initially moves into a small portion of Russian Poland by the end of 1914. By the end of 1915, they basically occupied all of Russian Poland. The Russians, in the early stages of the war, are communicating on an open radio system so that the Germans sort of know where the Russians are moving their troops. And although the Russians do occupy a small portion of Austria and Galicia, they are driven out of that as well. The problem for the Germans is the Russians have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of men, so it's a slogging war. So that's our first sort of run up. Basically, this is a war that kind of occurs by accident. All of the powers don't make the correct assumptions on how long the war is going to last, and the result is a defensive war in the West and a more offensive war in the East.